Greetings, welcome back to the channel. Eric's UK here. Apologies for the lack of content the last few months. I have been spending probably the last 6 months setting up another channel, which I will pop a link to down below if anyone's interested, which is to do with the Warhammer side of hobby. Set for casual players opposed to the competitive tournament and traditional scene. If you're interested in that, have a look down below. But I'm hoping to be back now and doing some vids. Today's topic, controversial, potentially. But let me know what you think. As the title says, has role-playing had its day? Why do I think that? In the 80s, I didn't start role-playing until 87, although I had an interest before that. Fighting fantasy game books, Dragon magazine, but it wasn't until I met people that I was able to start role-playing. But once I met people, I saw there was a family over here that I knew that was playing. There were people at school that were playing. I was in a group that was playing. And I knew that people were playing. In the 80s, you had a lot of role-playing games. Ones that, for those of us in the hobby at the time, we know are quite famous, almost legendary. Dungeons and Dragons, primarily, Call of Cthulhu, RuneQuest, Rolemaster, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You know, there was a smorgasbord, big word for the day, smorgasbord, of role-playing games out there, and people were playing them. Teenagers were playing it in high school, young people were playing it in college, university, and us old fogies at the time were playing it at home. You know, people were playing in game stores. Role-playing, even if people didn't know it, it was becoming a household sort of name. At least Dungeons and Dragons was well known. I remember we had a crime drama here in the UK called Taggart, a Scottish thing, and one episode of that, controversially, featured a murder based around Dungeons and Dragons. You know, role-playing games were in the wider circle. People knew what it was. Household name. Games Workshop was becoming big. They've been the company that brought Dungeons and Dragons to the UK. Realistically, they were the first ones to sort of sell it over here and make a big deal of it. They obviously went on in the 80s to produce a slew of board games. Talisman was a famous one for people that played, and you know, I can roll these names off, and you will have heard of. I'm sure most of you will have heard of them. You know, and then they obviously went on to do Warhammer and Warhammer 40k and Epic and so on. But the 80s, role-playing was big. Heading into the 90s, even I, we didn't have a game store at that time. We had a shop over in Cambridge, which was the nearest one at us at the time. And it was just a shop. You'd go in, you'd buy it, you'd walk, you'd leave out, you'd go home. Nowhere around here, because generally gaming stores in the UK didn't give playing space. That didn't really come about until Magic the Gathering. But you could sense something was in the air. And the early 90s were a bit weird for me. I always talk about how a certain time in my life has a feel. And I think that a lot of that is based around the gaming I was doing. And role-playing had a certain feel. And the 80s was awesome. I mean, I was in my teens. I didn't have a care in the world. It was awesome sauce. When my gran died in about 92 or 93, you know, we moved house. There was a lot of upheaval. That sort of feel changed. The role-playing sort of changed. And some of it was lost. But the 90s sort of picked up a little bit. They got a bit weird, though. You had second edition AD&D, which was a great game, which took up probably for me about half of that decade. We probably played that for about 5 or 6 years. Vampire Masquerade and storytelling games, what I would go on to say became indie games, sort of really took off. These are sort of games that brought more women into the hobby, whereas traditionally Dungeons and Dragons and the like was very male dominated. You had other fantastic titles like Deadlands, but by the end of the 90s, you could feel that something was dropping off. Gaming just didn't have that same buzz. You heard less and less. Magic the Gathering was really taking off. For me, I played that for 6 or 7 years before it got a bit silly, and that was massive. And I do think, I've spoken about this in other videos, I think Magic the Gathering stole a lot of players, or at least split their time between the two. But I think by the time we got to the end of the 90s, role-playing was on this downward slope. You didn't hear about it so much. I always felt that it kind of felt a little bit forced when it came through in sort of like gaming magazines that we had at the time. Other collectible card games were huge, which, as I say, I don't think helped. And it was only with the release of 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons that things started to pick up again, because you had an easier to learn system. It was promoted the hell out of by TSR and later Wizards of the Coast. It drew a lot of people in, and it drew a lot of people from things like MMOs and computer game role-playing. And 3rd edition had a huge, huge impact, I think, on role-playing. The OGL, the Open Gaming License, meant that anyone could publish something for that game. And I do think there was a little bit of a glut, as it were. There was too much, perhaps, being published. But that era, that early to mid 00s, I think was a huge resurgence. And you saw a lot of other companies starting up role-playing businesses and putting their games out. You saw a lot of people doing it online through the various websites where you could buy their PDFs. So you didn't need a physical copy. And then it kind of went, there was this huge, and that was the release of 4th edition, Dungeons and Dragons. Now, before the 4th edition fans go, no, it wasn't, it was really great. I'm not dissing your game. It wasn't for me, but I'm not dissing your game. But 3rd edition had been a very complex system. 4th edition tried to go, we don't want that. We want to go back to almost like basic D&D as old. We want to strip the mechanical aspect. We want to make it so more people can get into the hobby. D&D goes back to being a gateway game, and hopefully we'll keep them. And while there were a lot of people who really liked it, I think a lot of role players went, nah, you've jumped the shark on this one. I was one of them. That's why I'm glad that Pathfinder took off, which was the derivative from 3rd edition. But Pathfinder took those complex elements of 3rd edition that a certain population of gamers liked and ran with it. And D&D was left to be the gateway game. And 4th edition to me failed in that respect. It was, I don't know, just too simple, or just too, a lot of it was lost. A lot of that feel that makes Dungeons and Dragons what it is. And some people might scoff at that, but D&D has a certain feel, like I was talking about earlier. You know what you're expecting out of a game of Dungeons and Dragons. There's a classic thing that was there in the old basic D&D, in 1st edition, 2nd edition, and 3rd, even if you didn't like those sort of changes, D&D had a feel. It's a level-based system, it's magic items, it's kicking in the door, killing the monster, taking their stuff, even for those of us that try to do something a bit different to that. And 4th kind of, I don't know, you could feel a drop away. The OOs also saw a lot of indie games come out. And when I talk about an indie game, I don't know whether it's the same definition you use, but to me, the indie games are sort of like low print runs, if they even get printed and they're not just PDFs. but they kind of followed on from the storytelling aspect that White Wolf did with their World of Darkness games, which were not kick in the doors, kill the monster, take the stuff. They were about immersing the player in the game. If you played any of those sort of games, they were really, the storyteller was there to tell the story, but the players push things. The players, instead of, Bob kicks in the door, there's an orc, I attack the orc, boom, boom. It was more about immersion. You became the character, and even if something was bad, you went with it because it was about feeling it rather than just rolling the dice. And there's some very odd ones out there. I think it's called Kobolds Ate My Baby or My Life with Master. Really, really odd indie games. They're not ones where the GM is ever present, sort of thing, or omnipotent. The players run everything. And I see this in a few other games that came out. The Cubicle 5 did a Doctor Who, I think it's still going, Adventures in Time and Space. I tried to run that a few times, and basically it didn't gel. If you haven't got players that do that, it doesn't really work. And I think the end of the OOs started to see not such in-depth indie games, but that sort of thing coming out. You've still got them now. If you look at the current Alien RPG, it's very much that sort of thing. It's not geared for playing a campaign. It's geared for you one day playing Alien and you being the crew of a ship that picks something up and the aliens are doing. The next time you play it, you might be Colonial Marines the following week in a completely unrelated scenario. The next one, you might be smugglers or something, or you might be the scientists on a station doing something, but you're not playing like you would a normal role-playing game. Then you got D&D 5th edition. And again, I think you could feel that slump coming in further. They did the same thing as they did before. They went, right, we want a basic game. We want to strip away the flesh from the bones. We want to get back to the basics. And the problem is that I have played 5th edition over COVID. We did it online. And I came away from the end of the campaign going, well, didn't really enjoy that. And why didn't I enjoy that? Because it had been stripped down. It didn't feel like D&D. It didn't have any of that D&D-ness to it. They've taken away the idea of you having or finding magical items. They're kind of really reduced now. You don't have special abilities like you did in 3rd edition or Pathfinder. You're just kind of, And where once upon a time in the 80s, where games were not heavily complex, that would have worked. But this is a day and age now where people want bones on that skeleton and they want to play a game that's strong. And I don't think D&D 5th did it. The classic games, Call of Cthulhu is still going, but and I think they still do RuneQuest, fairly certain. But you've lost a lot of other games that people knew of, or they've changed. I don't know what the situation is with the World of Darkness games at the moment, but they killed off the original World of Darkness. They went for the new World of Darkness, which I don't think worked as well because they made too big a change instead of just carrying on with the game they had. Did a video or two about that a while back. Those big names we had 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, have almost gone, or their status has dropped away. Role-playing game, well, people know of it now because the internet, and you've got the likes of Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, you've got Warhammer is massive. Hobby gaming has spread, and it is popular. It's still popular, but I don't think role-playing games are on that same pedestal. I think a lot of people have lost interest in it. Either the old grognards like myself, are getting older. We don't really have the time for that anymore. Or in my case, I've got a group. We've been playing together for 30 odd years. But you've got people who are going, well, I've got a family now. Can't always commit to a game every week like we used to. Or now it's every other week, and they can't always do that. Or got to work in the morning, and you're losing people. Different society, I suppose, from back then, but also age. And I don't think you're getting as many new people in. We've got a local game store now, and they have nights for role-playing. And other than my Pathfinder group, every other Sunday, it's all D&D 5. And they're having fun with it. They're younger people. But I'm not seeing the players like we used to do. We used to be able to fill out a room for Pathfinder Society. We'd have like 4 or 5 games going some nights. Now, all right, that sort of thing's gone the way of the dinosaur. But you're not seeing those people anymore. They've moved on. And I don't think you're getting the new blood in. Magic the Gathering seems to be still massively popular, but I think the fact that they are now trying to do crossover sets. So there's a Godzilla one, there was a Warhammer 40k one, they're doing a Doctor Who one, there was a Assassin's Creed set. It's like you've run out of ideas and you're just pulling crap out of the ether to try and sell and make money. And I see people, you're not getting the same level of Magic players. Warhammer is picking up. Wargaming is doing really well. But again, costs are rising. People can't always afford that. But for role-playing, I just don't see it anymore. Forums have changed. Where you used to get lively discussion stuff, you just don't seem to have that anymore. There doesn't seem to be as many people anymore. And right now, despite my gaming contacts and associations and so on, I don't have that family over there is gaming. These guys are gaming. These guys are gaming. And I think role-playing has had its day. There's only so many adventures you can tell. There's only so many things that you can do. And there's only so many ways you can spend your time. I think COVID didn't help. I've said that before in other videos. I think people found other ways to fuel their fantasy needs, their gaming needs. And I will be surprised if in, let's say, 15 years, that there isn't much more going on for role-playing games. I think everything will move to an electronic format. You won't need to have people sat around the same table. They can do it all on their computer or on their phones. It will be an online map, like you see with Roll20 or whatever the current crap that Wizards of the Coast have been trying to do over the last year. I genuinely think that the days of role-playing games have had their peak and they are troughing. It's a shame. I don't think it will ever die. It's still going to go, but you're not going to have the same sort of population to the community. Am I wrong? If you sat through 19 minutes of this video, geez, that went on a bit. Tell me if I'm wrong. I know I've waffled. But I think genuinely that role-playing games have had their day. They're never going to be the same popularity as they were. They're never going to be as massive as they were. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button, hit subscribe. I'm going to try and push more videos out as topics come to mind. If you're interested, drop a comment down below. Let me know if I'm right or wrong. And as I say, if you're interested, I will also post a link to that Warhammer channel that I'm doing down below. Until then, take care, guys. Good gaming.